Thank you, sir. I rise today to move for unanimous consent on the American Shores Protection Act. And this would codify President Trump's 2020 moratorium on drilling off Florida's Gulf of America and Atlantic coasts. Florida has worked with President Trump for years to keep these operations off our pristine coasts, and not just for a sunny day to enjoy the Gulf, but because our coasts are a vital component of our state's economic success. In fact, Florida's beaches alone generate more than $127.7 billion a year in tourism spending and support more than 2.1 million related jobs. However, these great resources are vulnerable to risk posed by new offshore drilling. We all saw the devastating harm caused by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. That disaster wiped billions of dollars from Florida's industries and caused horrific damage to our environment and coastal communities. Places like Panama City Beach, Pensacola, Destin, they all saw dramatic drops in tourist revenues that summer following the catastrophe. Even places like Clearwater and St. Petersburg, Miami Beach suffered a decline in visitors after the oil spill. Our coasts also play an important role in securing our nation. The Gulf Test Range, a big part of the Department of War's training to ensure mission readiness, is supported by multiple military bases in Florida's Panhandle. More than 50,000 jobs in the Panhandle depend directly on operations at military facilities in this area. Eglin Air Force Base in Okaloosa County alone employs 20,000 people and provides the country with $11 billion in economic impact every year. If there were new offshore drilling in the Gulf Test Range, these activities that support national security would have to be reduced, meaning job cuts in an area that depends heavily on military activity. As a fifth-generation Floridian, preserving our state's natural beauty is deeply important to me and all Floridians and the millions that call the Sunshine State home, as well as those who come to visit and vacation. It's my mission to protect our state's coastline, from Pensacola Beach, where the Blue Angels fly, to Duval Street in Key West, from the iconic South Beach, Miami, to Fernandina and the very tip of Northeast Florida, all for our next generation. I appreciate my colleagues' support as we work together to ensure oil drilling stays off our beaches and we pass the American Shores Protection Act. And if I may defer to my fellow senator from Florida, Senator Rick Scott.
The senior senator from Florida.
I want to first thank my colleague from Florida, Senator Moody. I am proud to work together with her to protect Florida's shores, which is very, very, very important to Floridians. As Floridians, we know that our beaches and coastal waters are vital to the state's economy, environment, tourism, and military community. I've worked for years both as Florida's governor and U.S. senator to keep oil drilling off our coast. We do not want oil drilling on our coast. In 2018, I was proud to work with President Trump during his first term to extend the moratorium on oil drilling on Florida's coast through 2032. And I fought to codify this action as I got to the Senate. Florida's shorelines are not only an iconic and pristine part of the state's environment, they also generate jobs in the area and support billions in tourism revenue. Florida's beaches alone contribute more than $127 billion per year to our state's economy just in tourism spending. People come from all over the world to enjoy our beaches. 2.1 million jobs held by Floridians are tourism-related jobs. Our coasts are also a critical national security point for military training with the Gulf Test Range. Anybody that's done testing, if you've served along in the Panhandle, you know how important the military training is on the testing there for the Gulf Test Range. This range is an essential part of the Department of War's military training, supported by several military communities along Florida's Panhandle. It is the largest multi-domain military training complex in the country where armed forces can conduct advanced military testing, training, and evaluation of air and weapon systems. There is no place in the world like being able to test and train off the coast of Florida. The administration is right. We need to unleash Americans' energy, including American oil, but we cannot do that without sacrificing America's most important military training ground or hurting the Florida's economy or shoreline. I recently led a letter that was signed by the entire bipartisan Florida delegation. It's led by Senator Moody and me, urging President Trump to continue his commitment to keeping Florida's coast off the table for oil drilling and uphold his moratorium. Along with Senator Moody, I will always fight to keep oil drilling off of Florida's coast to support our economy, our environment, and our nation's military readiness. I look forward to continuing to work closely with the President, Senator Moody, and all of our colleagues on this important issue, and I yield back to my colleague from Florida, Senator Moody.
Mr. President?
The junior senator from Florida.
Oh, had to put the junior in there, right? Sorry, Mr. President. As if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of S. 3082 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President,
The senator from Utah.
reserving the right to object, this legislation has not been through the regular order. It's not received a legislative hearing, it hasn't been marked up, and it hasn't been reported by the Committee of Jurisdiction. As a result, there's been no opportunity with all of those stops along the legislative pathway having been skipped. There's been no opportunity for members of this body, for members of the Trump administration, for the two principal involved agencies within the U.S. Department of the Interior, known as BOEM and BESI, to provide their feedback or offer testimony on the implications of this legislation. Now look, the Senate's committee process exists, and it exists for a reason. It exists for exactly these sets of reasons. While that might have slightly different implications, depending on the committee involved and depending on the type of legislation, there are reasons why these things are there. And almost regardless of which committee is affected, you can normally benefit from this. And in fact, it's normally quite hazardous to just bypass all of this, because that's how we legislate without making sure that we've gone through all the necessary steps. This process that has evolved over the last roughly 2.5 centuries allows legislation to be examined in a transparent and a deliberate way, with input from affected agencies, from industries, from the President of the United States and members of his administration and senators on both sides of the aisle, including but not limited to the senators of the states who might be behind the legislation in question. Before legislation is advanced to the floor, it should be vetted through that process so that the Senate can fully understand and appreciate its scope, its effect, its legal posture, and whatever unintended or intended consequences the legislation might have. I've made it clear from the beginning that I'm willing to work with the senator from Florida. In fact, I've offered to place it on the agenda for the next subcommittee hearing within the Energy Subcommittee of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And it'd provide the Trump administration with the opportunity to weigh in with its views and allow us to hear analysis from BOEM and BESI and any other agencies that are affected, consistent with how the committee has considered other legislation within its jurisdiction this year, and consistent with the way it's always done it in the 15 years I've been a United States Senator. As chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, I've consistently stated that bills within the committee's jurisdiction should proceed through regular order. That process positions bills for successful consideration on the floor, consideration by the House, and ultimately enactment into law. Skipping that process allows a bill to jump ahead of others that have followed the rules and respected the committee system. So my objection today is not based on the merits of the underlying policy. It is based on the process. But the process is important to getting the policy right. That's why we don't skip it. That's why in the absence of a compelling, overwhelming, urgent reason, we don't just ignore it, and I can't and won't ignore it here. The Senate should not abandon its regular order by advancing legislation that's not been considered by the Committee of Jurisdiction. I look forward to working with my friend and colleague, the distinguished senator from Florida, to consider her bill in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in a transparent manner, and until that occurs, I must object and object now.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President, may I respond?
Senator from Florida.
I thank my colleague for taking the time to come down here today. I will note that he spent a lot of time talking about the long bureaucratic process that this must go through every single step, and that we must get the policy right, and going through the things that might take years, as we've seen happen in the Senate, is what the American people are tired of. And I did not come here as the newest U.S. Senator to do business as usual. In fact, you see where my desk is. It's in the very last row, almost to the edge of the Senate, because I'm one of the newest senators. And we need to do things different. We need to get things done. And in respect to the pristine beaches of Florida, we have to act with a sense of urgency. And as far as getting policy right, this simply codifies President Trump's 2020 moratorium on drilling off Florida's Gulf of America and Atlantic coasts. This policy has been negotiated and talked about, and it's already in a moratorium. This would simply codify that. I so appreciate my colleague offering to set this on the agenda, and I appreciate that. I hope my other Senate colleagues recognize the urgency to get this done. I can't think of anything more top of mind for Floridians right now, and I am proud to be here, along with my colleague Senator Scott, to fight for Floridians and fight for Florida's livelihood, our pristine natural resources. Thanks so much.
Mr. President.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I respect and deeply appreciate my friend and colleague, the distinguished senator from Florida, and I respect and admire her great devotion to protecting her state, its pristine beaches, and its many qualities that it enjoys. People from all over the United States of America and all over the world love to go to Florida. No one wants to take that away. I nonetheless take great umbrage, in fact, to a couple of characterizations, to which I must now respond. First, as to what she characterizes as the, quote, long bureaucratic process. This process is itself quite short, especially in comparison to an actual bureaucratic process, which it is not. Make no mistake, this is not a bureau. This is not a bureaucratic process. This is a legislative process. It's a legislative process that has endured for hundreds of years in this country, and it may not be perfect, but it's the best one we've got. It existed for many hundreds of years before that, in our mother country, before we became our own country, and there are reasons why these things develop. To call it a long bureaucratic process is neither fair nor accurate, and it misapprehends the nature of the legislative task, including the legislative task before us at this very moment. Now, with regard to the suggestion that by not passing this today, not passing it after leapfrogging over about 10 legislative steps that are essential to that process, we're somehow threatening Florida's pristine beaches and waters. It is simply not true. That couldn't be more untrue. Let's remember what happened in 2020. President Trump issued a moratorium. That moratorium stays in place until 2032. Absent some other action taken pursuant to that, the status quo is to protect them. What she's trying to do is to protect against President Trump doing anything consistent with his authority, consistent with that 2020 order. She's trying to tie his hands to prevent him from even figuring out what's there, to figure out whether there is a cost-benefit analysis on any of that. Now, sure, the Senate can consider that from time to time, and perhaps after the legislative process, not the bureaucratic process. That's something different. That doesn't exist here. Nor is this simply a delay for the sake of delay. I pride myself in running the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and bringing forward these hearings as expeditiously as possible. And I've offered to put it on the next appropriate subcommittee hearing. Now, if a mere delay of a few weeks or a few months where it takes that time isn't acceptable, I would like to know why. We have yet to hear a single reason, a single argument as to the parade of horribles of what could happen if we don't, as she would do here, tie President Trump's hands and bind him further legislatively beyond what he's already bound himself to through his own 2020 executive order. So this is in place. It will remain in place. And there has yet to be a single reason articulated as to why we should treat this as an emergency. There's nobody going down there to drill right now. We've still got the agencies who are looking at it. The least we can do, in consideration of President Trump, his administration, and the affected agencies, including those that I've mentioned earlier today, most particularly BOEM, is to hear them out first. In the absence of a compelling reason to leapfrog all of that, I must and will continue to object.
Thank you. I appreciate my colleagues' willingness
Senator
to
from Florida.
work in the next weeks or a few months. Thank you so much.